Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Open Ed Week 2025. This is our first presentation of the week of many, many presentations. But we here at LibreTexts are big fans of Rachel, and so we're very excited that she's here sharing her expertise in project management. And as I mentioned a few seconds ago, I'm going to let her introduce herself and get started. Rachel, if you need anything from me while you're going, just let me know. I'll be here
Cool.
letting people in, monitoring the chat, et cetera, et cetera. So,
Awesome. All right.
Rachel,
Well, perfect. Thank you so much. So my name is Rachel, and this is a presentation on OER project management. It's a strategic framework. I do have some template spreadsheets that I can give y'all at the end. And also, if you have any questions, the whole point of project management is there's a billion different terms and everyone's going to have to do it their own way. So if you want to talk about or dive into one element of this at the end, let me know. I do have a tendency to be an information fire hose and go through things really quickly. So let me know if you need me to repeat something. So who's speaking? My name's Rachel. I have a master's in library and information science. I'm currently the OER librarian at Irvine Valley College. Last year, I was the full-time OER librarian at Kalinga College, and I have built multiple OER programs. That's what I do. And before that, I worked in project management in other industries. So what we're going to talk about today, what is project management? An example of identifying needs and approaches within OER programs. Why do we implement project management strategies? How to use project management tools for OER programs and projects? How LibreText specifically can expedite WBS, which is called work breakdown structures? And how do we build support structures? So what is project management? At its biggest, it's really about planning, communication, execution, collaboration, and documentation. It's pretty dry. There aren't a lot of people who think, oh my God, it's a super fun topic that I just want to dive into, but it is something that I love. And I have found lots and lots and lots of amazing tools that really help me. And I'm happy to share any and all of those with y'all. So I'm going to give an example first from start to finish. So both colleges that I worked at Kalinga College in the Central Valley and Irvine Valley College, we would be considered late adopters. So OER has been around since the 1940s. In the state of California, people have been heavily working on OER for around the last 20 years. But a lot of colleges never got around to it. They didn't have the infrastructure for it. So when you come in as a late adopter, you get a couple of really fun things. You get to learn from early adopters. You get to ask questions. So the assessment that we took was we looked at our needs. We needed an OER program. We needed a way to be able to aggregate data to report back to the state. What we had on hand, we had support from administration. Every single community college in the state of California right now has funding from the state. And we had faculty who were willing to do this work, but they didn't really understand the how. How are we doing this work? The operations of this work. So what I got to do, which was actually really fun, I did information interviews with every single person up and down the entire coast who would talk to me. Anyone who was an early adopter, anyone who built a program. I talked to deans, administration. I talked to a lot of OER librarians. I talked to regular librarians. I talked to faculty and staff. And I asked, what works for you? What doesn't work for you? What would you do differently if you got to do it over? And what tools did you use? And what became very clear was that first, you have to be able to identify the barriers to OER at your location and make sure that you're addressing those. So the main barriers to OER are time and support. By far, the biggest challenge is faculty need time to actually build, and they need support systems. They need support structures. They need infrastructure. They need to understand OER principles. Do they understand the difference between OER and ZTC? Do they understand Creative Commons licensing, right? Fear of new things. Now, as we've said, OER has been around since the 1940s, but it can be new to us, right? So even though OER isn't new, it was new to us, and that's a fear of a new thing. And then lack of OER program infrastructure. Do we have communication management? Do we have logistics on payment and deliverables? Do we know what our state requirements are? Have we read the ed codes? Do we have implementation for OER in curriculum, classrooms, and Canvas? And do we have sustainability of these resources, which often involves the library? Are we going to just throw money at it, buy class sets, and then in 3 years have to buy new class sets when the publisher releases another thing? No, absolutely not. So how can we make sustainable resources using the library and using tools like LibreTexts? So what became very clear very fast was we needed project management and we needed OER building tools that would expedite this process to really hit on that main barrier of time. So LibreText became the clear front runner really quickly on that, and I'll go into detail about it. So what we tried. I am very much an academic freedom girly. I am going to tout academic freedom whenever possible. So when we first started looking at OER in what softwares we were going to use, I said, use whatever you're comfortable with. Faculty are comfortable with Microsoft Word, Google Documents, and Canvas. Now, That's fine. Go ahead and do that. But the reality was we were getting rough drafts that took 150 to 300 hours to make. Editing created a lot of challenges. Either you had multiple documents you're trying to navigate between, or you had one really long document that you're trying to scroll through. And the final product had navigation issues for students. It wasn't super usable for students. So when we switched to LibreTexts, those who were willing, right? Again, it's always academic freedom. It's the choice of the faculty. We started doing OER mapping, which faculty understand really well. We call it OER project planning now because they didn't like the term mapping. But basically, they're already doing curriculum planning. They already knew this step. Using the remixer in LibreTexts, that software does require training, and that was the biggest hurdle. And then when we embedded LibreTexts with 4 clicks into Canvas, this is when we saw faculty's eyes just light up, like, oh my gosh, this is so much easier. I can have a living document that I can edit whenever I want, but it can also be embedded in my Canvas so that my students never have to even click out. And the reality was the total work from start to finish to get the same rough draft took about 20 hours compared to 300 hours. And the final product was more usable for students. So finding awesome software isn't always enough though. You also need organization. You need infrastructure, you need communication, you need clear expectations on your timelines, your deliverables, stipends, processes, trainings, and tools. So what is a project? I get this all the time, so I just thought we'll go back to the basics. A project has a very clear beginning, middle, and end. If you say, oh, well, Rachel, the thing I'm doing is ongoing, it doesn't have an end. You're probably not talking about a project, you're talking about a program. So projects have very clear beginning, middle, and end. Programs, they often manage multiple projects, they work towards a broader goal. And then you have portfolios, which usually are above my pay grade. Portfolios are usually something that like an institution has multiple programs. Sometimes you'll hear a government official say, oh, I have multiple, programs in my portfolio. But that's usually the broader picture, are those portfolios. So this is the slide that I won't bore y'all to tears for an hour with this slide, but this is the slide that I could probably spend a solid 30 minutes talking on each and every point in here. And it would bore y'all to tears, but every single element on this timeline are things that technically, if you want a successful, stable program, you should probably address. So I'm going to go through the ones that I think are the most important. At the beginning and initiation, you have to know your stakeholders. For community colleges, that's 5 different categories of stakeholders. You need to know your scope. You need to know what your key performance indicators are. You need to identify those. You need to do a risk and feasibility assessment, and you need to secure buy-in. Now, buy-in is absolutely by far the most key. If your faculty don't want to do this, if they don't want to be the boots on the ground who are building this work, then there's nothing you can do about it, right? Everyone has the academic freedom to do whatever they want. You have to secure buy-in from your faculty or everything else is moot. When we go to planning and defining, work breakdown structures are going to be some of your most important. And what I love about project management terms, they are exactly what they are describing. We are talking about the structures that are within our work and how do we break those down into manageable bite-sized pieces. Do you have your teams identified and do you have your tasks assigned? Do we have our scope solidified? Do we have our budget estimates? Do we have our resource allocation, which is not necessarily the same thing as budget estimates? Do you have your schedules and timelines? And do you have your documentation for a critical path? Now, a critical path I will define for you right now. A critical path is the longest way it takes you to get from point A to point B. So think about if you're baking a cake. You cannot frost the cake before you've baked the cake. You cannot crack the eggs until you've pulled out the bowl. So there's certain things that you have to do in chronological order in order for the project to be done. So basically, you have to pull out the bowl first. You have to then get all the ingredients and mix it. Then you can put it in the oven and cook it. And then when you take it out of the oven, you let it cool and then you can ice it. Now, you can be cleaning up as you go on the side, absolutely. And you can be preheating the oven as you go, absolutely. Those are things that you can do at the same time. But your critical path are the things that can't be done at the same time. And how are we making sure that we've set times for that? Then you have your execution. This is where you have your task assignments, your team's kickoff, can be hard or soft launches, depending on how you feel about those. And then you're doing your project tracking, pain point tracking, and risk mitigation. And I have people all the time say, Rachel, there's no risk mitigation in OER. Absolutely there is. If you get $200,000 from the state of California for a pathway or program, and you only have 1 or 2 authors, that's a high-risk project. So how can we mitigate that? Are there other authors willing to help pick up the slack? Is there a backup option where we could buy a class set if we needed to? Is there other OERs already built that we can build on to encourage the work breakdown structure to be less brutal, basically? And then we start doing budget and resource tracking. Lastly, we have monitoring and supporting. This is where you have projects that will plateau, where suddenly things just kind of like peter out. You have scope creep management. Now, scope creep in most projects is a really dangerous thing. Scope creep is where someone's already building an OER and someone else says, hey, my neighbor is building an OER and they're getting paid this amount of money. Can I do it too? And the reality is, do you have the money for it? Is it going to change your timelines? In OER, it's not necessarily always a bad thing. Sometimes we would call it opportunistic scope expansion because we want as many people as possible to adopt OER. But do you have the money to pay them? Is it going to be equitable if they don't get paid the same as everybody else? Is it going to somehow change your timelines because now all of your supporting features are supporting that person as well, and that changes your timelines? So when you talk about scope creep, it's a two-edged sword because we want it in OER. We do want anybody and everybody to adopt OER, but also anytime you have scope creep, it's going to change your budgets and your timelines. Then you got to do milestone reviews, feedback loops, look for quality assurance and testing. You don't want someone turning in a single Word document with a list of links on it and saying, here's my OER, pay me. And then your last adjustments. And then finally, you need to do your end closure. What are your final deliverables? Are they operational? Do you have a ZTC degree that's up and that's operational? Do you have your final budgets and expenditure reports done, reported to the state? And do you have a transition plan? Where are you going from here? So this is something I hear all the time in academia is, oh no, Rachel, don't use industry terms. We don't like industry. Higher education isn't an industry. And so the reality is use whatever terms you want, whatever works for you. Rebranding is absolutely helpful. I am an operations girly. I have been told all the time, no, Rachel, you're not operations, you're a practitioner. And I say, where are the OER deliverables? And they say, oh, we like to call it completed work. We don't like to talk about stakeholders. We want to talk about partners. We don't want to talk about key performance indicators. We're going to say success metrics. We don't like return on investment. We're going to call it educational value. We don't like risk management. We'd rather say planning for challenges, budgeting. Some people like it, some don't. Maybe we just call it resource planning. And then buy-in, we like to call it faculty engagement, but that limits it because you're also talking about staff. So whatever you need to do to make it more palatable, go for it. The reason I like project management terms is they are very descriptive of what they are doing. Just recently, we were calling it OER mapping when you planned out an OER, and we found that mapping was a scary word for faculty here. So we're going to call it OER project planning because that seemed to work really well and was just as descriptive. So why do we do this? Why do we do project management? Why are y'all here listening to me talk about spreadsheets and documentation? The reality is whack-a-mole isn't a strategy. I don't know if y'all remember whack-a-mole. I'm an elder millennial, and so we had these games in arcades. And the reality is you don't want to get to this point because a lack of project management can lead to these 5 things. And I'm not going to lie to y'all, I have been brought into projects to help, and I have seen all of these things, and it's a spaghetti monster. So if you don't have project management, you're going to be constantly firefighting. You're just putting out fires all the time. You're going to have stress and burnout. You're going to have missed deadlines, scope creep that you didn't intend. Abandoned work is actually a really common one. A lot of faculty will get into it, realize how hard it is, and say, nope, I don't want to do it. Budget overruns, or you end up with money left over because nobody did the work. And then you're trying to spend down money. There's no accountability. You can have ineffective communications. Your team morale can drop. You can have missed deadlines and a lack of deliverables. You could spend all your money and not have anything to show for it. And so the whole goal of project management is to avoid these 5 things. Project management, without project management, it's just chaos. It's that whack-a-mole. And so that's the whole reason that we do this, even though it's not necessarily a fun thing to do. So when we talk about getting started with project management, there are 5 big categories that live rent-free in my head. And these are the 5. And again, this is another one of those slides that I could spend a ton of time on, but too much time, I'm going to bore you all to tears. So you got stakeholders and criteria are the first one. Now in the state of California, I work at a community college. We technically have 5 stakeholders, categories of stakeholders that all have criteria assigned to them. We have the state of California. They invested $115 million into community colleges. They have very specific ed codes and they have criteria that we have to meet. In my district, we have a board of trustees that approves all of our stipends. We have administration. We report to our VPI's office. We have faculty and staff who are your boots on the ground doing the hardcore work, but our end user is actually students. And then we do have a 6th stakeholder who doesn't have any criteria, but in OER, we also have a global community because all of these resources ideally lead to that global community of higher education. So then you have to think about your scope, and that's going to be your budgets. What's the minimum qualifications and minimal deliverables we need to be in compliance? What are our timelines? What are our labor breakdowns? Then you've got your teams and your work breakdown structures. This is where you've got your boots on the ground. These people, in my opinion, deserve the majority of your budgets. They deserve the majority of your support because they're the ones who are actually doing all of the work. You have software. LibreTexts is the software that by far will expedite this entire process from start to finish in a way that no other software will. There's repositories that you need, asynchronous support, trainings and templates, logistics for publishing, and you need support and backup. Documentation and tracking is something that a lot of people just kind of forget about until we have to do expenditure reports. I personally like Gantt charts. I have one that I'll show you all. And then if you're doing a single project, LibreTexts has some really lovely ones in their conductor page that I'll show you. And then you have to think about things like, are you doing ZTC pathway tracking? Are you doing ZTC course tracking? Are you doing project tracking? Do you have your KPIs identified for each of these categories? And then lastly, communication and risk mitigation. You need, the more transparent you can be in expectations, your work breakdown structures, your KPIs, and your critical path, the better off you'll be. And again, think of the critical path as you're baking that cake. So what support systems are you offering to your boots on the ground? How are you streamlining this critical path? The back-end support. Could you pay student workers or library workers, train them how to use the Remixer software, and then have them do copy editing to allow faculty to just be content editors? Could you have faculty be peer editors for content editing and easier adoption? Do you have a committee, like an OER committee, that's helping with program logistics? Are you coordinating with PD for trainings? And do you offer one-on-one support or office hours? So when we talk about, again, this critical path, we're baking a cake from start to finish. How are you scaffolding this work for faculty? And again, this is where LibreTexts is an amazing tool that can help. But from start to finish, here we go. You've got content curation and planning. This is very similar to curriculum planning for a lot of faculty. Once you teach them what an OER is and they learn how to browse different OER libraries, they can do that. Then we've got remixing. This is the software that takes some training. Then you've got content editing, accessibility, and copy editing and formatting. Now, usually all 5 of these categories get put on a faculty. But the reality is only 2 of them require a subject expert faculty to actually do them, right? We have a biotechnology ZTC pathway that we're building right now. I don't know anything about biotechnology. I couldn't scroll through the different amazing bio OERs that are on the library and LibreText. There's no way I would know which ones we could and couldn't use and where we would have to build. That has to be done by a faculty. But if they build a really beautiful OER map, I could remix it for them, no problem. And then basically fork every page. And then textbook content editing, again, would have to be the faculty. They have to do that. And then accessibility and copy editing. Often accessibility now, LibreText has that built-in accessibility feature for every page, which can expedite it. And then copy editing, sometimes formatting and typos could be done by AI now, or you could have a student worker, staff, or faculty. So this is where we start talking about how do we truly support our boots on the ground? And is it possible to scaffold the work breakdown structures in such a way so that the critical path isn't as brutal for your main stakeholders, which are faculty, in my opinion. So there's lots of different planning options. These are terms that if you've been in project management for very long, you've probably heard: waterfall, agile, scrum, sprints, critical path, critical chain, or rolling wave. The reality is you're probably going to use a variety of different ones depending on different things and depending on what level you're in. Are you talking about a program? Are you talking about a project? Are you talking about a single authoring project? So waterfall is what every administration I've ever been in wants. They want each phase completed before you begin the next step. This would be like you completely mix the cake before you even preheat the oven. So you completely mix the cake, you clean up your entire kitchen, you have it in a pan, all of your dishes are already clean, then you go and you turn on your oven to go and bake the cake. But the reality is that that takes extra time and that doesn't make sense. We could have easily been preheating the oven while we were mixing the ingredients. We can clean up while the actual cake is baking. So waterfall is very clean and tidy, but it often leads to really long timelines. Agile is kind of the reverse. It's so flexible and iterative. You're talking about short cycles. It's a lot of flexibility. Think about people who are running on a field and having to dodge and figure out where they're going as needed. And this is related to Scrum and sprints, which is when you have super fast-pacing, ever-evolving things. Maybe you're doing game design and you're having to like take feedback from users as you build. These are going to be your best models. And then critical path is the one that we talk about a lot within OER and critical chain. And this is where you have dependent tasks. You can't do copy editing until the book is written. You can't work on accessibility until after it's been remixed. But there's also elements of uncertainty or tight resources would be your critical chain. Now, I tend to use rolling wave, which is things that are right now, I want highly detailed. Things that we need to do right this second, I'm going to really dig into the details, but I'm going to try to build flexibility into anything in the future. And then usually I honestly use a combo. So you often hear hybrid. Oh, I use a hybrid of Agile and Scrum, or I use a hybrid of waterfall and critical path. So take what you want and leave the rest. You do not have to use any of these industry terms if you don't want to, but thinking about the fact that planning is going to be based on whatever it is that you need it to be for you. So when you talk about who's building the infrastructure for this, Currently at my current job, we have an OER committee that basically we do these things together. Before this, I was a full-time OER librarian, 40 hours a week. That's all I did. It can also be an administrator. And they're doing things like organizing the logistics of payments, deliverables with administration, making sure everybody has clear expectations. They're organizing the training and support for faculty. They're advocating for funding, tools. Are they doing accountability, right? We have XB12, ZTC pathway tracking, self-reporting. Are your OERs actually published and publicly available? Is it integrated into Canvas for usability with ADA accessibility and WCAG compliance? And are we actually building support for the people who are doing this work, or are we leaving them out in the desert to figure it out on their own? So when we talk about OER project management, like a big picture, this is kind of what I think of in my head. At the institution level, they're going to have a portfolio, they're going to have all of their elements, and within that, they have multiple programs, or you could call them committees, right? And so when we think about an OER program, you've got to think about the other programs that also might be related. So for instance, for OER or an OER committee, you're also going to have distance education or online education, right? Should probably be something that you're connecting with. Curriculum. If you have an AI task force, those are all other programs that should be kept in mind because there will be elements of that that could influence your program. Within the program, you have operations, which we just talked about, and reporting at the end. And in the middle, this is where you actually have your projects. Now here at Irvine Valley College, we're working on a biotechnology CTE, ZTC program. We're working on 3 AESL CDCPLs, and then we're working on 2 full 60-unit ADT degrees, which is the, subject expert plus all of the other ones, all for all 60 units. So when we're talking about projects, a project could be the pathway. It could also be one of these individual courses. And then independent builds, the reason I put this on here, this is where you get that scope creep. You can either build it in, and then it's just considered opportunistic scope expansion. And that can actually help with your pathways because your pathways are going to be more sustainable if you have more different courses that could fit in there. And then you can also do derivatives, which also makes your course more sustainable because you have someone who says, well, Emily already wrote one. I just don't like X, Y, and Z. Could I just get paid a smaller stipend just to change and tweak those? And then I'll have my own separate derivative. So when I think of OER programs and project management, this is usually what lives in my head. So you might be saying, well, Rachel, I'm not building an entire program, right? The reality of OER work and project management work is you can scale it up or down as needed. So we could be talking about a program. We could be talking about a department. We have an entire Spanish department. They all agree to use the same work. So they're working together. So they have the full-time tenured faculty are doing the main authoring, but then every single adjunct, every single person in that department, they're going to help edit and build, and then they're all going to use the same resource. That requires a ton of project management. And then you could also have a single author who's saying, hey, I just want to stay organized. I want to make sure. You could even do it as like checklists. It doesn't need to be super complicated. So if you say, what kind of project management tools do you use? Personally, I like anything that's open access. I want you to be able to click on it and be able to view it whether or not you have an account or not. So personally, I'm not a huge fan of Microsoft because it's behind a paywall. And they don't make sharing as easily because they have really prioritized security. But again, it's whatever works for you. I have a really insane template of different spreadsheets that I will share with y'all so that anyone could make a copy if you're interested. They're just things that I've collected over the years and that I've built out. But I also want to share with you, if you are building a project in LibreTexts, they have the conductor page. This is a Gantt chart. This has everything that you need in it at the project level, at a single authorship level for a single book. So the example I have right here, we were part of a cohort for the OERI, and we had authors from 3 different colleges working simultaneously on the same book. And so we had to have communication management down at the bottom there, which you can't see in the picture. We had to have timelines. We had to have deliverables. We're going to do peer review on it. So this is an amazing tool if you're building on the same textbook. If you have multiple authors for the same faculty, why do they all need their own derivative? Sometimes it's fun to learn from one another. Get everyone in your English department to work together to build one, English 3 course, rather than everybody having to make their own individual one. And this project management tool in LibreTexts will allow you to do that. So you can't even see this list because it's super tiny, but the reality is if you Google project management tools, there's tons and tons. I'm a huge fan of Google Sheets. Most OER librarians I know, they like Excel because they're more Microsoft than I am. Trello, if you like Kanban boards, which I can show you an example of, I love Kanban boards. Trello is free. The LibreTexts Conductor page I've used a lot when we're talking about a single project. Notion is also free. There's Monday.com is one that a lot of people use, and it's really, really lovely. And there's a whole bunch of others. The reality is it's whatever works for you. There is no one size fits all. Some people need physical things. I am definitely a Post-it note girl. If I'm in a place that has, I love whiteboards and I love Post-it notes, and I like to make physical Kanban boards with Post-it notes. So whatever works is fine, but my suggestion to all y'all is to be willing to try new things. And this is where I want to circle back to the fact that something that took 300 hours in a Word document or Google document, with the software training, which does take a little bit of time, you're looking at 20 hours in LibreText. So LibreText is going to get better accessibility. You have more usable formats. They can print, mobile, web, or it can be integrated into Canvas, which is what faculty like. And it's more navigatable. No more scrolling through a 300-page PDF or trying to hyperlink to certain parts of a 300-page PDF. And the time breakdown, the training in the software is the hardest part. And because faculty are the kings and queens of their domain, they're not used to being beginners, they're going to struggle to ask for help and they're going to forget, and you're going to have to retrain them. So on average, I found that most faculty need to be retrained on the software 2 to 3 times before they remember it. And that's okay. That's just the norm with a lot of software. So just building that time in, OER planning and mapping, or project planning as we're going to call it going forward, it is very similar to curriculum. Once faculty realize that, they're totally good to go. Remixing, if the planning was done well, takes an hour or less. Editing, 1 to 2 hours to get a rough draft done. Publishing, you're good to go. And then from there, you're going to tweak it. Absolutely, there's going to be iterations of this work, but you can have a rough draft done in 20 hours compared to 300 hours. If you're willing to try something new and if you're willing to learn the software. So there's a lot of really great resources out there. LibreText has a project management book. That's lovely. The OERI is producing lots of beautiful new spreadsheets all the time. I originally learned about project management through the Project Management Institute, the PMBOK guidebook. They're all lovely. Anything that you want to learn, it's always fun. These are my final thoughts for y'all. And then if you'd like a demo, I'm happy to show you. So OER project management, it's essential for long-term success. Just avoid the stress and the mess and build it in as much as possible. Your boots on the ground, they need the most support. They need the work breakdown structures. Faculty are your boots on the ground. Yes, they are using it, but they're doing it all for their students. They are busy. They have lives. They have kids. They have other things going on. They're often teaching overload already. How can we build in support systems for them with proper infrastructure and proper project management? Using LibreText will 100% expedite your work breakdown structures if you can teach them that software, and it empowers faculty autonomy. I've lost count of the number of times that faculty have realized that they now have a living document that they can update as needed, that they no longer have to choose a new book every 5 to 7 years for curriculum because they're just going to update it as needed. And it's really beautiful. Please remember, no one is a lone wolf. I get this all the time, especially with PhDs. They're like, I can do it all on my own. And it's like, no, that's a trauma response. Like, come with us, come help, let us help you. Only together are we truly successful. And then lastly, just think about the fact that OER truly is a powerful tool for the democratization of higher education. And the more support we can build in, the better. So I do have a Google document. Let's see if it'll just automatically do it. Okay. So, and then I don't have chat open. So let me know if there's any questions, but I'll just show y'all what I do. This is a blank one. If you guys would like this, I'm happy to share it. So this is an example of a Gantt chart. This is where I track all of our ZTC pathways. So here at Irvine Valley College, we have one that's finished. It's the TKCTE pathway that we did. So you can see at the top here, I deleted the actual course things and the faculty names, but this is where we had everything listed. You can see it's completed here. You can see that they didn't build textbooks. They just built OER courseware fully, so that got paid out. This is not applicable. They didn't do peer editing with it, and so there was no stipends for that. And then over here you have the OER work group. Is it on the agenda? Has it been approved or sent back? Has it been sent to administration for payment? Over here you have publications. Is it an internal? Is it global? Has it been put on the state repository yet, which technically isn't an option? It will be the referatory that they're building. And then accessibility. Do you have your full accessibility? Is it a single use or full department? And then are you done? Basically, is it published? And then this is where we put our links. So this is one, if you want to track everything on all pathways, so like we have the CTE for the TK, we have a CTE for biotechnology, we have one for AESL, and then we have 2 ADTs for Spanish and math that we're building. And I'm going to show you all some budgets for that. And then we did, at our very, very beginning, we did independent builds that were trainings that we didn't require deliverables for because it was a very, very low stipend amount. And this was just trainings, and so they were listed here with any link if they wanted to share. So that is a Gantt chart in a nutshell. I have links up here on mine where like I link to my Kanban board in Trello. I link to all my funding ledgers within our organization, which I took those hyperlinks out for y'all. And then I list all the people here. So for us, our main people, VPI, a grant manager, who's our dean, and then myself. And then I list all of our OER committee members. So this is a Gantt chart. Scope. A lot of administration, they don't want Gantt charts. It's too much for them. They look at it and they're just like, no, absolutely not. They prefer something like this, an OER scope. chart, right? And really it's just these two right here that they need. They want to know the big picture, how far along we are, how many courses we actually have to build total, and whether or not we're in budget or have a surplus. And then this is where we have that opportunistic scope expansion. We had money left over for our TKCT pathway. So we're looking into how can we best utilize that surplus to get the most bang for our buck. Economies of scale. This is if you're going to start scaling things out. We have a lot of programs that they only need a couple courses. So how could we possibly do that? So this is big scope, usually for administration. Deliverables A to Z, this is usually more for expenditure reportings or for librarians if they're going to make you a repository, an internal repository. You have your course name, what type of OER it is. Is it a Canvas course? Is it a textbook? Is it a lab manual? The actual deliverable, published and publicly available. And this would be all your reporting metadata. The CCN number, CID, section number, authoring number. Okay, then we have all of the grants. So for us right now at Irvine Valley College, we have a total of 5 different sources, pots of money, right? Technically 4, but we're going to split the 320 into 2 for Spanish and math. And so this is where we could track that. And someone like myself as the OER coordinator and OER librarian, I meet monthly with our grants analyst to make sure that we're cool, that everything's up to date on that. Team timeline tracking, this is one that I I took and adapted from the OERI. So this would be if you want to do team communication and tasks by the month. So for instance, we have the OER work group, right? These are all the tasks that were done. I think they were all assigned to me, which is why I didn't put that in here, whether they're complete or not, and any notes. And then I have it broken down because I'm a color-coded person, AESL, biotechnology, Spanish, math. And this is the timeline, so I should delete these from here because you guys don't need these in here. So I'll delete you guys don't need these. That's just not helpful for you guys, unless you want the independent builds. So we could delete the words. I was trying to clear it all out for y'all so you could just use it as is. But this gives you the drop-down menu, so you can say it's complete, it's in progress, it's delayed, you know, all of those things. So those are all things that can be helpful in tracking teams. So resources, we just passed a tiered stipend model that we're going to use for all of our programs right now. So that's what this is. It was highly debated, had to be approved by our administration because they have full purview over the funding and how we broke it down. And then over here, we have all of our resources. So for instance, this is one that faculty have really liked. They've really been a fan of our checklists. So this is a textbook checklist that's pretty comprehensive. You can see some things that are still being worked on here, but you're welcome to do file and make a copy. There's one for a Canvas shell checklist that is related to the OERI poker checklist. And then there's one for lab manuals because we have a lot of lab manuals. So there's a lot of stuff like that in here, rubrics for assessment for your OER. And then if you are not currently tracking your ZTC pathways, there are 3 beautiful examples here. Shabbat's by far is the most beautiful and built out that I've ever seen in my life. Lemoore and Kalinga both have more reasonable ones. And then like at Irvine Valley, we're trying to connect it to our research department right now. So I don't have one that I can show you from Irvine Valley. And these are rules. These are things that regularly have been misunderstood that I got confirmation on along with who I talked to. So if you wanted to ask further clarification, you could, because these were some of the biggest misunderstandings that faculty have found over the years. So last thing I'll show y'all is when we talk about an actual pathway breakdown of funding and how I personally organize it with the faculty. And I leave all of this open for them to see so that they can see exactly who's getting paid what. Transparent funding and ledgers, I think, is pretty important. So here you can see this is our biotechnology CTE. They were going to require 2 deliverables for the amount of money, and I took the money out just because I didn't know. I don't want to bias anybody. But we have the instructor's name, we have the actual resource, and then we have which 2 deliverables they're doing. Are they doing a textbook and a lab manual or a textbook and a Canvas course? And then we have whether or not we're going to do peer review or peer editing, the actual deliverables, and then we have our big picture budgets right here. So that's a pretty simple one. AESL, they have audio files that they need, and they're doing 2 rounds of peer editing because it's for a couple different purposes. So they had it broken down even more for things like peer editor 1, peer editor 2, audio files for an NBU, and then all of our published links here. So you break it down based on whatever the needs are for your program. And then here's one to show for a full ADT. This is for our math. Anything in gray, these were already had ZTC options, so we didn't need funding for them. And then anything that's in light gray, we didn't have any budget for it, but if we ended up with a surplus, peer editing leads to easier derivatives. It leads to a higher quality product. So peer editing is always a great option. So this is definitely a easy one for looking at a full ZTC pathway. So I'm gonna stop share. We go. And there you go. So that is I burned through that in 37 minutes. So that is my project management in a nutshell. Are there any questions? Would Would anyone like my crazy spreadsheets? You do not have to have them, but if anyone would like them, I am happy to give it to you. Okay, so here, I'll put the template in the chat. And I gave it to Jennifer as well, so she has it. You just go up to File, make a copy, and you can make your own copy and do whatever you want with it. None of this is like super original content. It's all stuff that I borrowed from others. I think the original Gantt chart came from Smartsheets template that was free. So take whatever you need. And then if there's any questions, let me know. The reality of this work is you guys have to figure out what works best for you. The more you can communicate with your teams, the better. And the more you can set really clear expectations, the better. Any other questions? Absolutely, Sarah. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's a pretty boring topic. It's not a fun topic.
I highly disagree with that comment, by the way. But then again, I am also an operations nerd, so
Yes.
you know, what else.
Yes.
So first of all, thank you for this. You're right. There are 30 million ways to do this. For example, I use Smartsheets mostly because that's what my research office uses, and I figure because I have to work so much with them,
Yeah.
I'm going to use what that. So I'm just going to throw that out there as another option of find out what your folks use on your campus, and that was really helpful. My question for you is this: you talked about connecting to budget spreadsheets or whatever. I don't know if you're a Banner school or a eLumen school or whatever, but if those listening, if you don't know what those are the backbone softwares that are often used for things like budgets and course scheduling and all these fun things. Okay.
Yes.
But Rachel, as Rachel knows, I'm also at a California community college. So yeah, we share a lot of these spaces together. So my question to you is this, Rachel. How did you get access to all of the budget numbers? And I'm asking this because I know how it's done at Kenyatta, where I am.
Yeah.
But not everybody does it the same way. So do you all have access to those directly, or do you have to go through people, or how do you get that info?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I came from Kalinga College, which was super, super small, and I directly reported to the VPI. So it was a much flatter structure. So it was really easy in Kalinga because basically we had a business office, but because I didn't have as levels of hierarchy, yes, but no, not every single faculty has access to them. However, I asked because it's OER, can we make transparent budgets? Because I think that's going to build trust with our faculty. And I got told yes. Has it been a mess? Absolutely. It's been a total mess. So I work regularly, and we are switching to Banner right now. So we are currently using a private system, and we are switching to Banner. And I meet monthly with our grants analyst who has access to all the back end, and she helps me update it. And then I have it all. I take whatever's been updated and I actually put it in a Google Sheet. Because yes, absolutely use whatever software they're using. I have found that some faculty really struggle. Like we have Workday, which is just this massive back end, and they're like, we don't even know what kind of work tags to get. And like I came from a place that used general ledgers. Now we don't have general ledgers. So now we call them work tags. So basically, it's very messy, but if you can talk to your vice president of instruction's office and say, hey, especially for OER work, transparent numbers is really important. And like, there is going to be that flexibility, right? So like, depending on what time they pay out a stipend, whether it's at the beginning or end of a semester, that changes the benefits a little bit. So like the numbers do move between like the 1,000 and 3,000 category, depending on time of the year and all those things. So like, I have found that it helps build trust because otherwise there's this narrative of like, well, they're stealing money or we don't know, or they're gatekeeping information. No, it's just, it is a little bit complicated, but it's not scary numbers. You know, I did get told once a couple of years ago, like, oh, Rachel, they're big girl numbers. Don't worry about it. And I was like, no, like we can figure it out. Like it's just math. Like it's not that hard. So like I try to build in like buffers in money, absolutely. But yes, I'm pretty tenacious about it. I just went to our grants analyst and I said, hey, like this is something that I feel would be really helpful for my faculty to understand because they need to see what everybody else is getting paid. And then they also need to be very clear on what they're getting paid for. So yeah, I can link out to we're using Tableau. So I can link out to Tableau really easily, and I can link out to Workday, but then I also have a spreadsheet that gets updated once a month. That's what is our main transparent ledgers. Did that answer the question?
It does. And it's just, like I said, at Kenyatta, we do things. It's just helpful to hear different options.
Yeah.
I'm thankful I have a good relationship with my administrators. That has not always been the case. That's more recent, shall we say?
Yeah.
So thank you.
Absolutely. And like here we have a dean as well. So like we have multiple other layers. So going through all of the layers can be really challenging. No one wants to be left out of the loop, but also nobody wants to be overburdened. So how do you balance that? Yeah. Then we have Yinglu. Do you have a question?
I do. Wonderful talk. Rachel, really enjoyed it. And so I'm also from California Community College. I'm from City College of San Francisco. And so okay, so a couple of things when you were talking. Number one, when you were saying that when you have that slide that shows that you only need 2 out of the 5 that need faculty expertise, and then the other 3 you can actually librarians or somebody else on campus can actually help faculty.
If you build up the infrastructure, not always.
If you had the infrastructure, exactly. So I was just thinking that I wish I had the infrastructure on my campus
Yes.
for someone to help me like that. But so the other thing I was actually just thinking, so beautiful Gantt chart. You're talking about stakeholders, and you're obviously managing the OER. You're dealing with different stakeholders. I was just wondering, what are the main challenges that you were facing when because obviously you are dealing with administrators, you are dealing with faculty, and here you are trying to build this infrastructure, trying to support them, and trying to, to get them to the right people to do the work.
This is a great question. So our administration right now has a really beautiful relationship with our academic senate. So we each get a mentor because I'm a tenure track faculty here. We all get a mentor. My mentor is the academic senate president. She's really tight and on really good terms with our vice president of instruction. So some of the things that have helped me is basically the fact that I have backing from very powerful people on campus who want this work, who have established, because I'm new here, right? So having established relationships really, really helped. Having an administration that's extremely pro OER is very, very helpful. But like as far as the challenges go, so like down here, there's those levels of hierarchy. There's just a lot more communication that you have to go through. And then I think it was really, really challenging to explain that, one, this is work outside of curriculum. So explaining that to faculty, because like I actually got multiple meetings with the vice president of instruction as well as the president to explain this to them, because they were like, why isn't this part of curriculum? Why are you projecting such high amounts? And I'm like, they're selling their intellectual property for global use, right? These are people who have PhDs, and I'm asking them, instead of writing a book and selling it on Amazon, I'm asking them to give it to me for free, and I'm going to give it away to the world. I'm going to put it on every single database I possibly can. They're giving away their intellectual property, and I need them to be compensated for that. So like some things like that took some explaining. And again, that's the communication management part. How are you getting the opportunity to do that? I only got the opportunity because the academic senate president has a beautiful relationship with our administration. So as far as that's a part of it. We don't have the infrastructure here that I described. So in Kalinga College, we were able to build it, that infrastructure where the faculty only have to do 2 out of the 5. Down here, we don't have that yet. So it's one of those things where it's like you can build it in if you already have existing structures. So in Kalinga, they already had student workers in the library. So basically, we were able to talk to the VPI's office and say, hey, can we get special permission? We had to run a job for our student workers to be trained as OER copy editors. So that was what we ended up doing. And then you were able to train those student workers to help, which was awesome and really did expedite. We ended up with a queue of work for the student workers to do. Some of them got to have their name listed as like a copy editor on an OER, which looked really good for them. We got to see students who didn't have any desire to transfer suddenly be like, I'm going to transfer to a 4-year and I'm going to go do this. And we had 2 that decided they wanted to go on and be librarians, which I thought was really beautiful, who before didn't have any interest in OER at all. But yeah, building out that infrastructure can be really hard. I don't know how long it'll take to get that here at Irvine Valley, especially since we have rules. We're not really supposed to do student workers. They're more on NBUs, but they don't allow NBUs to be off campus. They have to be on campus. So depending on what kind of rules you have at your campus, that can be really hard. We are pushing for faculty peer editors rather than NBUs, because it lets them create derivatives and we can pay them for that work, and then entire departments can use it. But the infrastructure is really hard. Building out infrastructure is hard. Having a committee down here. So up in Kalinga, I was all by myself, but reporting directly to the VPI, and I had really powerful people in my corner. You can turn on a dime when you're super small. When you're bigger, Irvine Valley is a nice middle range college, not nearly as big as your college. But like it takes longer to spend on a dime, but the committee actually means that we have other things that we can do. We can build out other PD options. We'll be able to offer office hours. So, and then if we can train individual department heads for the software, so then they can take those back to their departments and train. It's basically make little individual cells. That's the other part of that infrastructure. But yeah, it's really hard, but it's so fun, and it's got to be whatever works for your culture and whatever works for you in your place. But it's the better relationships you can build, the better. Did that answer your question at all, ma'am?
It did. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Any other questions? And again, I'm coming at this from an industry standpoint. Like I've worked in other industries building OER. I get told all the time that I use too many industry terms, that I don't understand enough about like the language in higher education. But I do usually pretty well when it comes to building the programs and making sure that everyone's really clear and getting those kind of organizational elements up and running. And I really do believe in this work. And if you can use LibreTexts to do it, I'm not going to lie to y'all. Sometimes it's a hard sell for faculty who just want to use Word documents. But if you can get them to try something new, it is absolutely worth the software training, and it will make your work so much easier and the final product will be better. Any other questions? Awesome. Jennifer, are we good to go?
I feel like that was a beautiful segue for me to plug Academy, which I'm throwing in the chat here, which is our brand new professional development center, if you will, for faculty and administrators and OER coordinators and anyone doing this work on campuses. Check out that link. There's an interest form there. Fill that out. My colleague Justin, who is here, is running Academy. He'll get in touch with you, go over some of the options that we have in order to help get you started. So sorry, Rachel, just had to throw that in there.
That was perfect.
Justin, do you have anything you would like to add before we close out this session? Thank you, Rachel, by the way. That was wonderful as always.
No, that was great. Yes, thank you, Rachel. And yeah, check out the Academy, especially if you're looking for extra trainings for your campus as well, because we're offering those virtual, in-person, professional development type trainings to help everybody get things, as Rachel mentioned. And we're listening to the community. We know there's a learning curve, and we're trying to lower it for everybody.
And we appreciate that. We really do. All right, folks. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks.